Hi, this is Rich at Capital Bee Supply. What I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about my Beekeepers toolbox and the kind of tools that we keep in the toolbox that we utilize when we're out in the field. Now, you don't need a big giant toolbox. The only reason I have a big giant toolbox is I carry a lot more stuff with me when we're doing sampling and testing than what normal people would do. But to show you some of the things that I have actually in this toolbox, it is nice to have something to carry all your tools in. It just makes it a lot easier for you when you're traveling out to the field and you keep everything together and keep everything organized. Of course, one of the things you want to have in your toolbox is you want to have a Hive tool. Sometimes it's handy to have a couple Hive tools. They can be a standard Hive tool like this, which is just essentially a flat prying bar with a hook on the end. Or you may want to have a J-hook Hive tool, which is a little bit different configuration. Some people prefer the J-hooks because of the fact that they are easier to lever the frames out with and maybe less damage. But if you use a Hive tool properly, even a simple Hive tool, they work very, very well. You don't want these to be overly sharp, but you don't want them dull either. If they're overly sharp, what they'll do is they'll dig into the wood as you're scraping propolis off of your edges of your boxes, or if you're scraping burr comb off of tops or bottoms of frames. If they're too sharp, they cut in, but you don't want them dull either. So some kind of compromised sharpness is what you're after for your Hive tool. And really the flat end is the one that needs to be sharpened. The opposite end you don't have to sharpen all that much with a hook because most of the time you're using it to lever frames apart or you're using it to scrape frame rests and clean frame rests. So a Hive tool is one of the things I usually carry with me in my box. The other tool that I carry with me in my box typically is a bee brush. This one's a pretty clean bee brush. Looks like it's a relatively new one. But sometimes you find yourself in a situation where you want to move some bees or brush some bees out of the way. Now, the trick with a bee brush is we call it a brush, but it really should be called a flick. Because when you work with a bee brush, you don't want to just brush over bees like this. If you brush over bees like that, you'll aggravate them. So what you want to do instead is you want to flick, 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 flick. So when you're cleaning bees off a frame, you're flicking them off of the frame so that they lose their grip with their tarsal claws and you can get them cleared off of there. So a bee brush, another handy tool to have when you're going out into the field to examine your bees. Something else that can be convenient to have is some form of magnifier. If your eyesight isn't the greatest as far as seeing eggs sometimes down in cells, it can be handy to have a magnifier with you. Just a hand magnifier works well versus trying to put on some kind of a headband type magnifier. They'll always be in the wrong place or won't be able to see through them anyway. So just a simple magnifying glass. Sometimes that's kind of nice to have to take along with you out in the field. They usually get dirty in your bee box or in your toolbox. You have to clean them up occasionally, but it's still another nice tool to have. Something else, not mandatory, but it is kind of handy to take along, is if you get days that are a little bit more overcast and you can't see down into cells, or you are having problems seeing down into cells, normally when you're handling frames, you stand so that the sunlight's coming from behind you and use the advantage of the sunlight to see down those cells. But if you got an overcast day, or again, eyesight's not all that great, taking along some form of a flashlight, that can help you see down in cells relatively easily. So it's another thing that can be handy to take along in your toolbox. Not necessary, but just something to think about, especially if you're having a hard time seeing eggs down in the cells. Other things that I take along, usually I have just some scraps of hardware cloth. This is just number 8 hardware cloth. It's 1/8 of an inch openings. Screen mesh. These are just scraps that we have from our manufacturing of screen bottom boards and other products that we make. But sometimes it's nice to have this available to block in an entrance. So for instance, I usually have some longer pieces with me that I can just fold and form and shove into the entrance of a hive. These flat square ones, I don't use them very often, normally only if I was going to move a hive. And what I do with these is I usually have drilled holes in my upper boxes and I staple these over the holes. So that means you got to carry along some form of a stapler too. Here's that other Hive tool. This one is not in the cleanest condition, but there is a J-hook Hive tool. The idea here is that when you're breaking frames apart, instead of levering frames with the hook end and levering between frames and then using the opposite end or your fingers to try to pull frames out with a standard Hive tool, with this one what you do is you lever them apart with this end. So this goes in and levers apart, and then you use the J-hook end and you put that down in, and this rests on the adjacent frame, and you can lever that frame out from the ears of the frame, which are where it just sits right on the frame rest, just behind the contact with the frame rest. So that's a J-hook Hive tool. Another thing you can take, and another option in terms of Hive tools in your toolbox. This is just a piece of cork, and what this really is for my smoker. I must not have put it in my smoker when I finished last time. What you do with this is you use this to plug off the end of your smoker so that you can take and snuff out your fire. So I carry those things along with me when I'm doing my when I'm taking my tools out into the field. Other things I usually carry with me in my bee box, depending upon the time of year, I'll carry along my mite sampler. So this tool here is for doing powdered sugar rolls or alcohol wash. If you're doing alcohol wash or windshield washer wash, then you got to take along some windshield washer fluid or some alcohol. If you're doing powdered sugar rolls, you got to take along some amount of powdered sugar. And you want to keep your powdered sugar nice and dry. You don't want it to get all hard and clumpy and stuff. So you want to keep it sealed up. The other thing too that I don't have right with me in this box, but I normally take along also, is just a little bit of duct tape. Orange, yellow, gray, whatever your favorite color is. Duct tape can work effectively at sealing up things, just like screen can. So duct tape's another option, or another thing you could just throw in the box. Just simple to take along and have with you in your bee box. Other handy tools that are nice. This is a frame grip. The purpose of a frame grip is to literally grip the top bars of a frame and give you some assistance in lifting them out. So if you have arthritis in your fingers or arthritis in your hands, or you have a hard time sometimes grabbing onto frames, especially if you're wearing gloves. There's a lot of times I work barehanded in hives, and that gives you a little more dexterity, but gloves interfere with that. And so in some cases you can use a frame grip in one hand and a Hive tool in the other hand, and you can kind of grab onto the top of a frame and then use your Hive tool to try to help lever it out while you pull gently. So some people find a frame grip handy. There are different designs of these. Some are very good designs, some are bad designs. What we carry is this style here, which actually has these serrated teeth in the ends. It's spring loaded. It actually fits your hand comfy. That's nice. There's some that are not very comfortable to use, so you want to try them out before you buy one to make sure it's the right kind of thing for you. Other things I carry along, usually I carry along, just in case, I carry along some Benadryl. This here, of course, in the summer months and stuff, you have to kind of watch, and because it will get in kind of bad shape if you got your box saws sitting in the sun. So you want to store it, normally you're supposed to store it between not more than 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you got in a hot car or something, it probably loses its effectiveness. I usually carry along some Benadryl tablets. I don't generally have any problems with stings, but just in case, some people will actually carry some Benadryl liquid with them. Sometimes the liquid is a little bit better. So if you do have or are concerned about sting reaction, it's not going to help you if you are severely allergic, where you go into anaphylactic shock, but it can give you a little bit of relief if you have a very, if you get these large local types of reactions. That's most of what I carry in my toolbox most of the time. You can always throw in other stuff. Sometimes I'm carrying along some extra hive beetle traps if I need them, but have some space in there so that you can throw in some other things as you see fit. When you're doing mite treatments, most of the mite treatments today, if you're using a acid-based treatment or if you're using whether it's a formic acid or oxalic acid, or even if you're handling Apivar strips, which are the amitraz-based product, you do want to have some protective equipment. And this is just a set of chemical gloves that I wear when I'm handling things like the formic acid or pads, or when I'm handling the Apivar amitraz strips. And even when you're handling sometimes the thymol gel products in the ApiGuard, it's nice just to have a separate set of gloves for handling that material as well. That's the bulk of what I take with me out to the field. Again, I've got a lot bigger box because I got a lot more junk in there that I use occasionally, but those are the fundamental tools that I have. The miscellaneous things I may have in here, if I'm doing sampling of bees, like for instance if I'm doing nosema sampling, I usually have just some Ziploc bags along to capture bees for sampling for that purpose. I will, like I had mentioned, if I'm stapling in screen, I usually have a stapler with me, and I usually have some spare staples along with me for that, so I've got those available. If I'm working in the winter, other things I have are some stoppers or corks. These are for plugging my upper entrance holes in boxes so that we drill them for upper entrances. So I'm carrying a lot of extra stuff along with me all the time. But again, you don't need to carry all that stuff. You can kind of plan in advance for what you've got going on. So that's some fundamental stuff as it relates to Hive Tools and what I'm kind of carrying around my bee box. And I hope that helps you out in trying to plan what you should take out with you to your apiary.